The Empress sat in her grand chamber, staring out at the vast city below. The lights of the alien world twinkled, but her mind was far from calm. She was in trouble, serious trouble. Her heat cycle had begun, and without the essence of a human male, she would not survive. Her body, powerful and regal, was suddenly weak, and the pain was unbearable. She had never been this desperate in her life. As the ruler of a mighty empire, she had commanded entire armies, led her people through war, and conquered countless planets. But none of that mattered now. Her strength, her power, meant nothing. The only thing that could save her now was the essence of a human male, a rare and mysterious energy that no other species could provide. The Empress had known about this need for years, but she had always avoided it. Humans were weak, primitive creatures compared to her own people. Her empire had always looked down on them, but now she had no choice. She needed one of them, and she needed them soon. A deep sigh escaped her lips as she clenched her fists. Her mind raced with thoughts of what would happen if she didn't find a human in time. She would die. Her people would lose their ruler, their guiding light, and the empire she had built over many years would crumble. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. "Your Empress," came the voice of one of her generals, a trusted ally who had served her for many years. "Enter," she called out, her voice shaky but still filled with authority. The general stepped inside, bowing his head in respect. "Empress, we have scoured every corner of the galaxy. There are no humans to be found. The ones we found, they are too far away, unreachable." Her eyes narrowed. "You are telling me that you cannot find a human on an entire galaxy?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. "I am sorry, Empress," the general said, his voice low. "We have searched every possible planet where humans might be, but none are near enough to help you." The Empress felt a wave of panic rise within her. The clock was ticking. She could already feel her heat cycle growing worse. The pain in her body was unbearable. Her skin was hot to the touch, and her breathing was shallow. She had to act quickly, but she was used to being in control. She was the Empress. She had always been the one to give orders, not the one to beg for help. "Find one," she ordered sharply, her voice cold despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "I don't care how. Bring me a human. Now." The general bowed again. "As you wish, Empress. We will search further. But I must warn you, humans are not easy to capture. And if they are to be found, they will not come willingly." The Empress dismissed him with a wave of her hand. She was too far gone to care about the details. She needed help, and she needed it now. As the door closed behind her general, the Empress sank back into her chair. Her thoughts were jumbled. How had she come to this point? She had always been strong. She had ruled with an iron fist, never showing weakness. Now, here she was, begging for the essence of a human. The very idea made her feel small. But there was no time for self-pity. Her body was failing her. And if she didn't find a solution soon, everything she had worked for would fall apart. Her empire, her legacy, gone. A vision of her people flashed in her mind. The soldiers who fought bravely for her, the citizens who looked up to her, the allies who depended on her strength. They all needed her. They needed her to survive. The Empress rose to her feet, her posture straight and proud despite the weakness she felt inside. She would not let this be the end. She had come too far, fought too many battles to let something like this defeat her. A plan formed in her mind. She had heard rumors of humans being captured by alien forces on other planets. If her own generals could not find one, perhaps she would have to do it herself. She would travel to the nearest galaxy, take control of the situation, and find the essence she needed. She turned toward the large window, staring at the stars beyond. The journey would be dangerous. She might have to risk everything. But she was the Empress. Nothing could stand in her way, not even the desperation she felt in her bones. Her people needed her, and she would survive. The human arrival. The Empress paced back and forth in her chamber, her mind racing. She had given her generals the order to find a human. But hours had passed, and no one had returned with any news. The pain from her heat cycle was worsening. It felt like her entire body was on fire. Each breath was harder to take, and her once strong body was failing her. The desperation in her heart was growing, but she refused to show weakness. She was the empress of an entire empire. She had conquered countless worlds, led armies to victory, and survived the most dangerous situations. Yet now, she was helpless, waiting for the one thing that could save her, a human. She stopped in front of a large mirror, staring at her reflection. The Empress had always been proud of her appearance. Tall, powerful, with sharp features and eyes that could command respect from anyone. But now, her beauty felt useless. The pain in her body made it hard to focus. She needed a solution, and fast. Suddenly, the door to her chamber swung open. A soldier rushed inside, breathing heavily. "Empress, we have found one," he said, his voice shaking. "A human male. He is in the outer reaches of the galaxy, and we are bringing him in." The Empress's heart skipped a beat. A human. Finally. She had almost given up hope, but now, there was a chance. "Bring him here, immediately," she ordered, her voice still commanding despite the agony she was in. Within moments, the doors opened again. The human soldier was dragged inside by two of her strongest guards. He looked confused, his eyes wide with fear. His clothes were torn from the rough journey, and he appeared exhausted. But there was something about him, a strength, a resilience that caught the Empress's attention. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a strong build. His dark hair was messy, and his face was rough, but there was an undeniable energy about him. He was different from the weak, fragile humans she had heard about. There was something in his eyes, something that made her pause for a moment. The human was thrown to his knees before her, his hands bound with strong ropes. He struggled, but the guards kept him in place. The Empress studied him closely, her heart pounding in her chest. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice smooth, but there was a hint of desperation behind her words. The human raised his head slowly, meeting her gaze. "I'm a soldier," he said hoarsely. "I was on a mission, but something went wrong. My ship crashed. I've been stranded here for days." The Empress took a step closer, her eyes never leaving him. She could feel the pull of his presence, an energy that seemed to fill the room. It was strange, like nothing she had ever felt before. She had been around powerful beings, but this human, there was something different about him. "You are the only one," she whispered, almost to herself. "The only one who can help me." The human blinked in confusion. "Help you," he repeated. "I don't know what you're talking about." Her breath hitched. The heat was overwhelming now, and she could feel it consuming her. She fought to keep her composure, but it was getting harder by the second. She had to explain. He had to understand. "I need your essence," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. "It's the only thing that can save me." The human looked at her, clearly confused and a bit wary. "Essence? What do you mean?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. The Empress's heart raced. She had no time to explain everything to him. She had no time to convince him. She needed him to act, to give her what she needed. "My heat cycle," she said quickly, trying to keep her voice steady. "It is killing me. Only the essence of a human male can save me." For a moment, there was silence. The human looked at her, his face a mix of confusion and shock. I don't know what you want from me," he said, his voice shaking. "I don't even understand what's happening. I'm just trying to survive." The Empress could feel the heat rising again. It was unbearable now, and she took a step closer to the human. She had no choice. She had to make him understand, to make him help her. "You don't understand," she said urgently. "If you do not give me what I need, I will die. The empire will fall. My people will have no leader. I cannot let that happen." She reached out, placing a hand on his arm. feeling his warmth. "Please," she whispered, her voice desperate. "Help me. I beg you." The human stared at her, his eyes searching her face. There was something in his gaze now, something different from before. Sympathy. Understanding. The Empress couldn't tell, but it was enough. For a moment, he looked almost soft, as if he was starting to feel for her. "I'll help you," he said quietly, his voice low and filled with uncertainty. "But I don't know how." The Empress felt a wave of relief wash over her. He would help her. That was all that mattered. The worst of the pain still gripped her, but now there was a glimmer of hope. She had found her salvation, her essence. The bargain. The Empress stood still, her body aching with the unbearable heat. She had never been this vulnerable before, never felt so powerless. Her mind raced, but her focus was entirely on the human in front of her. He had agreed to help her, but she needed to make sure he understood exactly what that meant. She couldn't afford to take any chances. This human, while strong and determined, was still just a creature from a primitive world. She, on the other hand, was an empress, ruler of an entire galaxy. She needed to remain in control, to ensure that this situation didn't spiral out of her hands. "You understand what you're agreeing to, don't you?" she asked, her voice firm, though the desperation still lingered beneath the surface. The human nodded slowly, his eyes still uncertain but with a hint of understanding. "You said I could help you, with your heat cycle. I don't know how, but if it will save you, I'll do what I can." The Empress could feel the heat growing worse, her body betraying her. She had little time to convince him, and even less time to explain the full extent of what would happen. But she had to be clear. She had to protect herself. "Helping me is not simple," she said, her voice steady but filled with authority. "The essence I need is not something you can give easily. It will take more than just your willingness. It will demand a price." The human looked at her, his brow furrowing. "A price?" His voice was filled with confusion. "What price?" "You're asking for my help, aren't you?" "I am," the Empress replied. "But I cannot make it easy for you. The essence I need comes with a cost, and it may take more from you than you realize. You must decide if you are truly willing to pay it." The human didn't say anything for a moment. He seemed to be considering her words, weighing the offer, the consequences, and the strange situation he found himself in. "I don't have much choice, do I?" he said finally, his voice tinged with frustration. "You said you would die without my help, and I don't want that. But I don't know what kind of price you're talking about." The Empress stepped closer to him, her eyes locking onto his. She could feel her pulse quicken as the heat inside her surged again, but she kept her composure. This was a moment of power, her power, and she needed him to understand that. She needed him to know the gravity of what he was agreeing to. "The price is simple," she said softly, her voice calm but sharp. "You will give me what I need to survive. In return, I will grant you something in exchange. I can offer you power, wealth, or freedom, whatever you desire. But there is one thing I will not offer: your soul." The human stared at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, there was silence. The tension in the room thickened, and the Empress could feel her heart pounding in her chest, the pressure of the situation bearing down on her. "You're asking for more than I can give," he said quietly, his voice low but firm. "If you're asking for my freedom or my life, that's not a bargain I can agree to." The Empress's eyes narrowed. She could see the fear in his eyes, but she also saw his resolve. He was no fool. He understood that this wasn't an ordinary request. But the offer she was making was more than fair. It was generous. And yet there was something in the human's gaze that made her pause. "No," she said slowly, her voice softer this time. "I'm not asking for your life, and I will not take your freedom. But you will serve me in ways you do not yet understand. That is the price. You will help me, and you will serve my needs." The human took a deep breath, clearly wrestling with his own emotions. "And if I refuse?" The Empress felt a flicker of annoyance stir within her, but she quickly smothered it. He was being stubborn, as any human might. He didn't fully understand her power, nor did he grasp the consequences of rejecting her offer. She couldn't allow him to refuse. Not now. If you refuse, she said quietly, her voice dangerous, I will let you leave. But you will not survive in this galaxy. You will be hunted, lost, and your death will be slow and painful. I will make sure of it. The human's eyes flashed with a mix of anger and fear. But even then, he didn't back down. He met her gaze, his jaw clenched. I'm not afraid of dying, he said, his voice steady. But I'm not going to make any decisions without knowing the full cost. What exactly do you mean by serving you? What will you ask of me? The Empress studied him, her mind working quickly. He was smart, too smart, and that was a challenge. But it would also make this more interesting. You will serve me in ways that you cannot yet comprehend, she replied cryptically. I will ask you to do things for me, to provide what I need. And in return you will gain more than you ever dreamed possible. Power, riches, influence. All of it will be yours. The human was silent for a moment, and the Empress watched him closely, feeling the heat grow even stronger, threatening to overtake her. She couldn't wait much longer. Finally, the human nodded slowly. I'll do it, he said, his voice resigned but firm. I'll help you, but I want your word. No tricks, no lies. The Empress smiled, though there was no warmth in it. You have my word, she said, her tone sharp and commanding. He was now part of her plan, and together they would survive. The ritual begins. The Empress stood in the center of the grand chamber, her breath shallow and rapid. The heat inside her was growing stronger, a force she could no longer control. It felt as though her very soul was being pulled apart, and she had no choice but to rely on the human standing beside her. He was quiet, his expression uncertain, but there was something about the way he stood that told her he was ready to do what he had promised. The chamber around them was dark, except for the soft, glowing symbols etched into the walls. These ancient marks were part of the ritual, a practice from her people that had been passed down for centuries. They would need the full strength of the symbols, the magic that powered them, to complete the ritual. Without them, nothing would work, and if it failed, she didn't want to think about what might happen. The human stepped forward, his movements slow, almost hesitant. The Empress could feel his unease, but she ignored it. She needed him to focus, needed him to understand that this was the only way she could survive. Are you ready? She asked, her voice calm but carrying an edge of urgency. He looked at her, his eyes wide but determined. I'm ready, he said, though his voice betrayed a hint of doubt. The Empress gave a small nod. She understood. This was just as strange for him as it was for her, but there was no turning back now. The ritual had begun, and there was only one way forward. With a deep breath, the Empress raised her hands, the golden symbols on her palms glowing faintly. She could feel the power of the ritual stirring, building, as it had been designed to do. Her people had used this ritual for generations, but never had it been so dire, never had it been so personal. The human stepped closer to her, his expression more serious now. He could feel the energy in the room, the way it pressed against him, making the air thick and heavy. I'm not sure I understand everything, he said, his voice low. But I trust you. I'll do whatever it takes. The Empress smiled faintly, though the smile was strained. Good, she whispered. Now, take your place. He moved to stand before her, the distance between them closing as he took his position. She could feel the heat coming off his body, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. It was strange how something so simple could be so comforting. In this moment, he was the only thing standing between her and death. Now, the Empress began, her voice steady. You must offer yourself to me. But be careful. The essence I need will come only through the deepest connection. You must give willingly. The human nodded, his expression serious. He didn't fully understand what would happen, but he was willing to trust her. That was all she needed from him. With a quick motion, the Empress lifted her hands, the symbols on her body glowing brighter now. The energy in the room shifted, the air crackling with magic. She could feel it, the way the power pulsed around them, seeking something, searching for the source it needed. The human watched her carefully, his gaze never leaving her. "What do I need to do?" he asked. "Stand still," she instructed, her voice low and filled with command. "Let the ritual do its work. Do not fight it." He nodded again, his body tense but obedient. He was ready, but the weight of the moment was not lost on him. He could feel the magic pulling at him, a strange, foreign energy that tugged at his very being. The Empress closed her eyes, focusing on the symbols that glowed brighter with every passing second. She could feel the power building inside her, the heat within her body intensifying as the ritual began to take hold. The symbols were feeding on her energy, drawing from her desperation, from her need for survival. And then, the air between them seemed to snap. The Empress gasped as a wave of heat rushed through her, the power of the ritual overwhelming her senses. It was happening. The essence she so desperately needed was within reach, but it would require everything she had left. The human, standing before her, could feel the pressure building. He could feel the heat, the raw power in the air, but he didn't understand how or why. All he knew was that she was depending on him. This was his chance to save her. A faint glow began to surround them both, a shimmering light that grew stronger with each passing second. The symbols on the walls, on the floor, and now on their bodies, were all linked by the same energy, the same force. The Empress could feel it. It was taking her, pulling her in, but at the same time, she could feel the human's essence, his power, flowing into her. She felt his energy surge, felt it in every fiber of her being. The ritual was working, but it wasn't easy. The human could sense the strain on her, could feel the power that seemed to tear at her, but still, she held on. He was giving what was needed, though he didn't fully know what that would cost. "Don't stop," the Empress urged, her voice barely a whisper. "Keep giving. Keep helping me." The human, his face strained, nodded and closed his eyes. He focused on her, on the connection they shared, letting the magic flow between them. He didn't know how long this would take, but he knew he couldn't stop. Not now. The Empress's body trembled as the ritual continued, her strength fading, but the energy she was drawing from him kept her going. She needed this. She needed him. The glow around them intensified, and the Empress felt herself being lifted, her body floating in the air as the ritual reached its peak. This was the moment when everything would change. She could feel her power returning, the heat inside her fading as the essence she needed filled her. And in that moment, she knew she had survived. For now. Changing feelings. The ritual had ended, but the air still hummed with energy. The Empress stood in the center of the room, her body glowing with power, her strength returning. But as she stood there, her heart felt something strange, something she didn't expect. It wasn't just the warmth of the ritual. It was the human. He was standing quietly at a distance, his face serious, though he was breathing heavily. He had given her what she needed, and the ritual had worked. But now, something was different. The air between them felt different. The Empress couldn't explain it. Her people had always relied on these kinds of rituals, but they had never felt like this. She had always known that the essence she took was vital for her survival, but now she felt more than just the power flowing inside her. She felt connected to him in a way that was confusing, but also undeniable. The human seemed to notice the change too. He looked at her, his eyes soft but cautious. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low, unsure of what had happened during the ritual. The Empress took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice lacked the usual confidence. She had never felt unsure before, especially after a successful ritual. But now, something inside her was shifting. "Thank you for your help." The human nodded, but he didn't look completely at ease. His eyes lingered on her for a moment longer than necessary, as though he was trying to understand the changes happening. "You're different," he said quietly. Her gaze shifted to him again, and she found herself studying him. His expression was still uncertain, but there was something about the way he looked at her. It was different from before, more curious, but also more trusting. She had always known that her people were distant from others, especially humans, but now she felt closer. "You've changed me," the Empress whispered, mostly to herself, but she knew the human could hear her. She couldn't explain why she felt so drawn to him. After all, he was just a human, a simple human who had no idea of the weight of the ritual he had helped with. The human seemed taken aback. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to help. I didn't think." "I know," the Empress interrupted softly, her tone more gentle than she had intended. "I know you only wanted to help. But it's not just the ritual. It's something more. I can feel it. And I don't know what it is." The human's face softened as he took a step closer. "Maybe it's just the connection we made. It's not every day that two beings share something like that. Maybe it's just the bond from the ritual." The Empress couldn't help but wonder. Was that all it was? A simple bond formed from the ritual? Or was it something deeper, something more personal? She looked away for a moment, her mind racing. Her people never mixed with others like this. Emotions were a luxury she had never been allowed to indulge in. But now, standing here, in this strange and quiet moment, she felt something stir inside her, something she couldn't control. The human spoke again, breaking her thoughts. "I understand if you need space," he said, his voice kind but careful. "You've been through a lot." The Empress turned back to him, her eyes meeting his. The warmth inside her only grew. "No," she said, her voice steadier now, though still soft. "I don't need space. I need to understand this." The human nodded. "I get it. I didn't know what to expect either. But maybe we can figure it out together." Together. The word echoed in the Empress's mind. She had always been alone, always had to face everything alone. But now she wasn't so sure. The human wasn't just a tool in the ritual. He wasn't just someone who had given her what she needed to survive. He had become something else, something more important. For the first time in her life, the Empress felt vulnerable. She had allowed herself to feel something. And it scared her. The human didn't step away. Instead, he remained close, though respectful of the space she needed. He was patient, understanding in a way that made her feel safe. It was strange. She didn't want to feel safe. She didn't need safety. But now, she realized how much she had longed for it. The Empress looked at him, her gaze softening. "You've changed me," she said again, but this time there was no confusion in her voice. It was a simple truth. "I never thought I would feel like this. I never thought I would care." The human's expression softened as well, his eyes showing something she hadn't seen before, compassion. "You don't have to be alone anymore," he said gently. "I'm here. We're in this together." For the first time in a long time, the Empress allowed herself to believe it. Maybe she wasn't as alone as she had always thought. The final choice. The Empress paced slowly through her chambers, her mind clouded with thoughts. The human was still in the room, waiting. He had given her space after their last conversation, but now the silence felt heavier. She could feel the weight of the decision she had to make, a decision that could change everything. She had never been faced with a choice like this before. She had always followed the rules of her people, always put the empire first. Emotions were not a luxury for a leader like her. But now, everything was different. Her people were depending on her, and yet, so was the human. He had been nothing more than a means to an end at first, just someone who could help her survive her heat cycle. But now, as the days had passed since the ritual, she found herself thinking about him in ways that she never thought possible. He had become more than just a tool. He had become someone who mattered. She stopped at the window and looked out at the stars. Her empire stretched out across the galaxy, vast and powerful, but none of that seemed important anymore. The only thing that mattered now was the choice she had to make. Empress. The human's voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to see him standing at the entrance, watching her closely. His face was serious, but his eyes were full of concern. "Have you made your decision?" he asked. The Empress looked at him, her heart heavy. She had always been certain, always had a clear path ahead. But now she didn't know what to do. He was right there, waiting for her, but so was her duty to her people. If she chose him, everything would change. The empire would change. Her power would change. "I don't know," she whispered. Her voice was quiet, but the human heard it. He stepped closer, though he didn't cross the threshold into the room. His presence was a comfort, yet it also made her feel exposed. She had never let anyone see her like this, vulnerable, unsure. "You don't have to decide right now," the human said gently. "But I think you know what's at stake." She nodded slowly. He was right. She could feel the pull between them, a bond that was undeniable. She had always thought that power was the only thing that mattered. But now, she wondered if there was more to life than just ruling. Was it possible to have both? Could she lead her people and still allow herself to feel? The Empress took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm inside her. She needed to make this decision, but how could she? The consequences were too great. If she chose him, she risked everything. Her position as Empress, her empire, her control, it would all change. And yet there was something else, a quiet voice inside her that told her this choice wasn't just about duty or power. It was about her, about what she truly wanted. The human had shown her kindness and care, things she had never experienced before. His presence had changed her in ways she couldn't ignore. "I don't want to lose my people," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't want to lose the empire I've built." "You won't lose anything," the human replied, his voice soft but firm. "You'll gain something. You'll be able to have both. You don't have to choose between duty and happiness." The Empress stared at him, trying to understand. Could it really be that simple? Could she have both? Her heart told her one thing, but her mind was still unsure. She had always thought that a ruler had to sacrifice everything for the greater good. But now, standing before this human who had cared for her, she wondered if that was really the only way. The human took a step forward, his eyes searching hers. "You don't have to decide today, but think about it. What do you want? What will make you feel whole again?" Her heart ached. For the first time, she realized how much she had been denying herself. She had been so focused on duty, on the needs of her empire, that she had forgotten what it felt like to want something for herself. "I want," she paused, her words faltering. "I want to feel whole again. I want to know what it's like to be more than just a leader." The human smiled softly. "You already are. You're not just an empress. You're a person with your own desires, your own feelings." The Empress's chest tightened. She had never allowed herself to think like that. She had always been the Empress, the ruler. But now, in this moment, she felt something different. She felt like a woman who could choose her own path, a path that could include the human who had helped her, who had shown her a different way of living. The human stepped closer, his voice gentle but full of hope. "You don't have to carry the weight of the universe on your shoulders alone. You don't have to choose between your people and yourself. You can have both." The Empress looked at him, her heart torn. Could she really have both? Could she have the empire and the life she wanted with him? Her mind raced with the possibilities, but one thing was clear. She couldn't deny the pull between them any longer. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them. "I don't know if I can have both," she said quietly, "but I'm willing to try." The human's face softened, and he reached out, his hand brushing hers. "We'll figure it out together." For the first time in a long time, the Empress allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have it all. A new beginning. The Empress stood before the grand window of her palace, her hands resting lightly on the cool glass. Outside, the stars of the galaxy sparkled like diamonds, vast and endless. Yet within her, everything felt different now. The weight of her responsibilities, the duty to her people, and the power she had held so tightly for so long, it all felt lighter. Not gone, but lighter. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she had to carry it all alone. She glanced to the side where the human stood. He had come to her once more, not as a mere tool to help her survive, but as a partner, someone she had come to trust. The decision had been made. The choice that had once seemed impossible was now clear, and it was because of him. He had shown her that there was more to life than just ruling, that there was room for love, for connection, for understanding. "I never thought I'd be here," the Empress said softly, her voice filled with quiet awe. "Standing on the edge of everything I've ever known. And yet, it feels right." The human smiled, stepping closer to her. His presence was calming, grounding. He had become her anchor in a world full of uncertainty. "You made the right choice. You always knew it, deep down." She turned to face him, meeting his eyes. She had always seen power in others, always believed that power was the greatest force in the universe. But now she understood something deeper. True strength didn't come from control. It came from vulnerability, from the ability to open up, to let others in. "I never thought I could have both," she admitted. "The Empire and everything else. But now, I see that it's possible." The human nodded, his expression warm. "It's not easy, and it won't always be perfect, but you don't have to choose between your people and yourself anymore. You can lead with both strength and love." Her heart fluttered at his words. It had been hard to accept, hard to believe that she could balance both worlds. But with him by her side, she felt a newfound sense of hope. Hope that she could be the leader she had always been, but also a person who lived for herself, not just for others. "What happens now?" the Empress asked, her voice filled with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. "How do we move forward?" The human reached out, gently taking her hand. "We take it one step at a time. Together, you'll lead your people, but you'll also live for yourself. Your heart won't be divided anymore." The Empress looked down at their joined hands, feeling the warmth of his touch. She had never allowed herself to be close to anyone before, always maintaining a careful distance from her people. But now, everything was different. The human had shown her that true strength came from connection, from allowing others in, even when it seemed impossible. The thought of the Empire and the future ahead still loomed large in her mind. There would be challenges, no doubt. There would be those who questioned her decisions, who doubted her ability to rule with compassion instead of fear. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She had something she never thought she'd have: a partner who believed in her, who stood by her side. "I'll need your help," the Empress said, her voice steady but full of resolve. "We need to rebuild, to make the Empire better. But it can't just be about power. It has to be about the people. They deserve more than what they've had." The human smiled, his eyes full of trust. "I'm with you, no matter what." Together, they walked out of the palace, stepping into the future. The Empress knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it. She had a partner, a confidant, someone who saw her for who she truly was, not just as a ruler, but as a person. And with that support, she believed she could bring about the change her empire desperately needed. As they walked hand in hand, the stars above seemed to shine a little brighter. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs to shape. A new beginning had started, not just for her, but for the entire galaxy. She wasn't just an empress anymore. She was a leader, a partner, and most importantly, she was a woman who had learned the power of love and trust. And that, she realized, was the greatest power of all.